Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is June the 11th, 2026. In my most recent videos, I've discussed the exposure of CIA fraudster, who made it to the senior executive service level with a completely fabricated resume. Excuse me. And of course, I segued into uh, other, apparent fraudsters like uh, the late uh, a German PhD in history. She had a PhD in history. She was a historian, and she had a popular blog, a writer. She had about 240,000 subscribers. Her name was Maria Sophie Hingst, who had fabricated a backstory and a history, a heritage of being a Jewish descendant of Holocaust victims, when in fact she was not actually Jewish. She committed suicide. I've done videos discussing that. And I thought I should use that to, discuss other imposters, other people who have fabricated their identities, and they became notorious as a result of their fabricated backstory and histories. Um, so today I want to discuss an American who had fabricated his story and background as an Auschwitz survivor. Auschwitz was the notorious concentration camp of the Nazis during the Second World War. Uh, the Holocaust was uh, a a uh, was the mass killing, right? Was the genocide of 6 million Jews during the Second World War by Nazis, where they were carted off into concentration camps and killed as European Jews. Um, so today I want to discuss Joseph Hirt, was a 91-year-old in 2016. And in the month of June, interestingly, was June 2016, about 10 years ago, when he apologized, wrote a letter, uh, a public apology letter, confessing that he had never been a Holocaust survivor. He had never been a prisoner in Auschwitz. And I'm going to read portions of that letter. I don't want to put my words into his mouth. I don't know if he's late now, because he was 91 years old at the time, 10 years ago. And so I'm going to give the backstory. Uh, but importantly, though, let me just state for the record that I'm going to state for the record that uh, the Holocaust did happen. I was actually a Holocaust study fellow. I was fortunate to be a Holocaust study fellow at Columbia University's Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies. I was very fortunate, and so I read, studied a lot of the literature on the Holocaust. So the Holocaust did happen, but unfortunately, there were many people, for various reasons, due to fraud, some due to mental illness or whatever, they started to exploit the facts and history of the Holocaust, and claimed to be Holocaust survivors when they were not. Some would give conceded rationale justifications for their misconduct, by claiming that they perpetrated and disseminated the falsehoods in order to keep the story of the Holocaust alive, or make people aware of the Holocaust. So they lied and claimed they were Holocaust survivors themselves, without actually realizing that um, their lies, their fabrications, actually just uh, adds grist for the mill for Holocaust deniers, right? So there are Holocaust deniers out there, and people who fabricate being Holocaust survivors, like Joseph Hirt. All they do is provide them for fodder, right? They don't. They try to diminish the history, the reality of the Holocaust, which happened. It's been over 80 years ago now. So, but in any event, I want to keep this video short, so I'm just going to quickly talk about his background and then I will read an excerpt from his letter of apology. So Joseph Hirt, became notorious and widely known. He actually got on TV. So I've watched videos of him. They're still available on the internet, in which he was on the news and he was interviewed and he was talking about having his experience in Auschwitz. Again, he was never in Auschwitz, but he claimed he was in Auschwitz, and he talked about the atrocities, the abuses he suffered, and these things were fabrications. So they're available on the internet, and I've seen these videos myself. They're still there, and he also embellished. Of course, everything he said was a fabrication. He even had the serial number, right? The tattooed numbers of internees in concentration camps, right? It would turn out, later on, upon investigation, a history teacher from New York, Andrew Reed, who got interested, he'd taken his students to go and listen to Joseph Hirt, because Joseph Hirt would give lectures around schools. He traveled widely. He became notorious as being a Holocaust survivor, and in fact, he was in the process of writing a book about surviving Auschwitz. But Andrew Reed decided to start digging deep on his own, and he found that there were inconsistencies in his statements, and things just didn't add up. And so he released a 25-page expose regarding the fabrications of Joseph Hirt. But in any event, amongst the claims of Joseph Hirt, it was discovered that the tattoo on his arm was actually another person's tattoo, a real internee's tattoo, who was actually famous. I had this book, amongst the books that we had to read in the Holocaust study class, right, as where I was a Holocaust study fellow at Columbia University, was Levi Primo. So he actually tattooed the number of Levi Primo, someone who was a prisoner in Auschwitz. He had that person's number tattooed to his arm, and of course as a thing with imposters and con artists, they start to embellish their stories. They amplify. Of course, everything is fabricated, but they start to exaggerate and make these larger, life amplified, too good to be true stories, right? For instance, he talked about meeting Adolf Hitler, and he saw when Adolf Hitler supposedly snubbed Jesse Owens, right? Jesse Owens was the American Olympian who won the gold medals at the Olympics in Berlin, when Adolf Hitler was the German dictator. So he claimed he met Eleanor Roosevelt. He had just all these. He said he had met the notorious physician Joseph Mengele, right, who tortured internees, prisoners at the concentration camps. So he had all these embellishments. Eventually, he claimed that he escaped through by passing under an electrified barbed wire, a fence, at Auschwitz. That's how he escaped. But in any event, Andrew Reed, after listening to him, he was a history school teacher. Interestingly, by the way, Joseph Hirt, right, the Holocaust survivor, con artist, right, he had actually been a high school psychologist, which is interesting. So you can see how for many years, I think roughly for many years, he had been deceiving and manipulating the public and his audience about being a Holocaust survivor when he was not. So Andrew Reid started to investigate on his own, and that's the thing about Americans. Americans are very resourceful, and he eventually, noted the inconsistencies in a 25-page investigative report, and he contacted the public and let media outlets see the inconsistencies um, in Joseph Hirt's stories. Eventually, Joseph Hirt admitted, but Andrew Reid would insist that Joseph Hirt publicly apologize, write a public letter of apology. Otherwise, he was going to petition various district attorneys in Lancaster County and Lewis counties in Pennsylvania, right, to prosecute to open a criminal investigation into prosecuting um, Joseph Hirt, right? Again, fabricating a tragic history or survivor history or whatever, it's not a crime. But if it's linked to receiving, to using false pretenses to obtain money, then it can be criminally prosecuted. Remember, Holocaust survivors paid reparations, different sorts of compensation by Germany, and so if in the event that it was found that through making these false claims of being a Holocaust survivor, Joseph Hirt was discovered to have received money from sympathizers or received money from Germany or things like that, then of course he would be, he could face jail, significant fines and punishment. So he did agree to give a public apology, and I'm just going to quickly read from his public apology. It's ironic that although he did give a public apology, but his public apology still um, was very sanctimonious, right? It's very sanctimonious. It's not sincere. It's you see all the conceit. See the conceit in it. Um, so I'm going to try. I'm trying to pull this up on my computer, which for some reason it appears that. So just one moment, please. I apologize. And so I pull this up. Okay, here it is. So sometime in June, so he was 91 years old at the time, and he was a man from Lancaster, right? So LNP newspaper is what it was called, and I'm just reading an excerpt. It says, "I am writing today to apologize publicly for harm caused to anyone because of my inserting myself into the description." No, so I get these pop-ups. Descriptions of life in Auschwitz. I, oh my gosh, why? I apologize. I'm going to start again. Because I pulled this up. The letter is actually online, so that's one of the great things about the internet. Of course, you can do your research independently. You don't have to live in a library or use the resources of a school to be able to do your independent research anymore. But of course, because it's available freely, you get all these pop-up ads. So I quote again. "I am writing today to apologize publicly for harm caused to anyone because of my inserting myself into the descriptions of life in Auschwitz. I was not a prisoner there. I did not intend to lessen or overshadow the events which truly happened there by falsely claiming to have been personally involved. It wasn't about me I was wrong in using an untruth, my presence, in an attempt to enhance the important truth of the suffering and death of so many, not only Jewish people, but also others held in disdain by the Nazi movement. I was wrong. I asked for forgiveness. I used poor judgment and faulty reasoning and risking a sullying of the truth I was trying to share. Um, what is ironic, like I said, it's it appears that it was only after it was exposed, it was outed and threatened with a criminal investigation that he gives this letter of apology. I don't think he was sincere. He claimed that he visited Auschwitz. In the same letter of apology, he gives a motivation for fabricating his story about being a Holocaust survivor at Auschwitz. He claimed that it was after a visit to Auschwitz that he made a visit to Auschwitz, much later on, because Auschwitz became a museum, and he claimed that it had become this tourist destination. In fact, let me read from him. Um, and he said, that there was a denial. He was trying to uh, do his part to preserve the actual memories and things like that by fabricating things. So he goes, he was shocked when he visited Auschwitz, right, a place of such persecution and death, to be a clean and polished tourist destination. I determined at that moment to do everything in my power to prevent the loss of the truth about wartime life and death at Auschwitz. So, very conceited, of course, unctuous, not sincere. Interest. So he's claiming that he created the fabrications to because he had a sense of outrage that Auschwitz had become a tourist destination, right? When people were actually going to confirm and validate the realities of Auschwitz, right? But he was misrepresenting the fact that this is a museum. I've been to the Holocaust, the Smithsonian's Holocaust Museum, and I've read many books about the Holocaust. Again, I was a Holocaust study fellow. But prior to that, I'd actually read, again, I had a very well stocked library in my home. My father had when I was back in Nigeria. And it's a reason my old brother's a professor of philosophy, he's a widely known professor of philosophy, because I'd read so much about, I'd read biographies of Adolf Hitler, not because I was a fan of his, but of course I read biographies of world leaders, and I read biographies I read histories of the Second World War, and of course the Holocaust was a significant feature of the atrocities of the Second World War. So I already knew of these things. So when I saw pictures, I saw so many things. When I visited the Smithsonian, I remember somebody that was with me, a female. I think she was really shaken, and so it moves people. So for him to misrepresent Auschwitz, which it's a museum, as a clean and polished tourist destination, and he felt that his fabrications, right, of being a survivor would reinforce and validate the victims of the Holocaust, right, rather than provide fodder for Holocaust deniers, which it ended up doing, right? Is of course not sincere. Interestingly, though, Andrew Reid spoke with him and accepted his apology. Andrew Reid gave his reason. That's the history teacher in New York who, incidentally, was born in Lancaster as well. Who, did his independent investigation and was able to expose uh, uh, Joseph Hirt as a fraud. The reason Andrew Reid, persisted on, exposing Joseph Hirt was because he said his first job, his first boss was a Holocaust survivor. Of course, him living in New York. He said his first boss was a Holocaust survivor, and he heard the stories, and things like that. It's interesting. I've been a banker. I was a banker in Massachusetts, and there was someone, an elderly lady who was very pleasant. She spoke with a German accent, and she had the tattooed numbers, on her forearm. And she told me she was a Holocaust survivor. So when you see atrocities, stories of people who fabricated numbers on their arms and invented these fabrications, these false stories, the stories of people like Maria Sophie Hengst. It's unfortunate that she took her life once she was exposed. When you hear these stories of these fabrications, you start to be skeptical and might tend to be suspicious of an actual Holocaust survivor story that you've encountered that might be real. You start to wonder, that was that person a fraudster as well. In any event, the Holocaust did happen, and there are many other atrocities that happen today as well. And we should expose these atrocities in order to ensure that the human rights of every individual is respected. Again, I've been talking about my own abuses that I suffered from police brutality, the corrupt Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland, which abused me and then fabricated charges, false charges against me, and a criminal state attorney, John McCarthy, and his minions, his minion assistant state attorneys that are pursuing a malicious prosecution in order to obstruct justice and protect, cover up police misconduct in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland. Unfortunately, I don't have the mainstream media behind me to expose the atrocities, the human rights violations, and the hate crime of Montgomery County Police. Like the media, mainstream media supported Joseph Hirt in disseminating his falsehoods, which only tended to diminish survivors of the atrocity of the Holocaust. In any event, my name's Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.